Welcome to Founding Chronicles, where America's forgotten past comes alive. If you enjoy these haunting tales of history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Now let us journey back to Tennessee in 1838, where whispers began of 7 sisters who seemed untouched by time itself. The hills of Tennessee in 1838 carried a quiet that could not be found anywhere else. Rolling pastures stretched into mist. Rivers cut their way through the earth like silver veins, and small farmhouses stood stubborn against the wild winds that came down from the Smoky Mountains. Folks lived simple lives there, plowing fields, raising families, and praying every Sunday in small wooden churches, where the benches creaked louder than the preacher's voice. Life was hard, but it was steady. You were born, you worked, you aged, and then you passed on, leaving behind a name carved in stone beneath oak trees. That was the rhythm of life, unchangeable, predictable, and accepted. But in 1838, whispers began to stir in a small Tennessee valley about 7 sisters who lived apart from the rest of the world. 7 young women, bound by blood, who seemed to belong to time itself, but were untouched by its hand. Their home sat on a ridge above the valley, a weathered house with a sagging roof and tall, narrow windows that looked more like watchful eyes than glass panes. Few men dared approach it, though many had seen the sisters walking together near the edge of the woods, their figures tall, graceful, and unshaken by the years that passed around them. It was said that each one was beautiful, though not in the ordinary sense. Their faces were pale and smooth as porcelain, their dark eyes steady, and their hair, whether golden or black, fell long and uncut, as though it had never been touched by age or hardship. The strangest thing of all was not that they were lovely, but that they were unchanged. Old farmers swore they had seen them as girls 30 years before. Yet when they looked again in 1838, the sisters were exactly as they remembered, no older, no different, as though time itself had chosen to pass them by. Young boys grew into fathers. Mothers turned gray and frail. Yet the 7 sisters walked the ridge like shadows that never shifted, never wore down, never faded. The valley folk began to talk, as people always do. Some called them blessed, touched by God with eternal youth. Others whispered that they had made a bargain with the devil, trading their souls for beauty and years that never ended. Still others said they were witches, carrying with them some old country curse that bound them together in a spell too dark to speak of. No one truly knew. Yet every story began with the same uneasy truth: 7 sisters who never aged, and a mystery that no one dared solve. The truth first reached the wider world in the winter of 1838, when a man named William Harlan came to the valley. He was a schoolteacher, new to Tennessee, having traveled from Virginia to find work in the growing settlements. William was a curious man by nature, with a mind sharper than most, and he paid attention to the stories told by old men at the tavern and women hanging laundry by the stream. They spoke of the sisters with nervous glances and lowered voices, but William, like many outsiders, believed it was just mountain superstition, the kind that filled the empty spaces of hard lives. That is, until he saw them himself. It was a late afternoon, the sky the color of dying embers, when he spotted them walking in a line along the ridge. They were dressed in long plain dresses, the sort of garments any woman of the valley might wear, but on them the fabric hung with an elegance that turned the ordinary into something unforgettable. Their steps were slow, and even moving together as though they were one body. None of them looked at him directly, yet William felt something strange stir in his chest, a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. He could not explain it, but he knew he was looking at something beyond ordinary. He asked about them the very next day. The tavern keeper shook his head. "Best you leave that matter alone," he warned. "The sisters keep to themselves. Ain't no man wise who meddles where he don't belong." But William was not the sort to turn away. He pressed the question, speaking with old families who had lived in the valley for generations. From them, he gathered pieces of a puzzle too strange to ignore. The sisters' parents, it was said, had been settlers from the east who built their house on the ridge long before Tennessee became a state. Their father was remembered as a stern man with sharp eyes, their mother a quiet woman who rarely came to market. Both had died long ago, yet their daughters remained unchanged, untouched, and uncanny. No one could say for certain how old the sisters were, but the oldest stories placed them near 60 years of age. And yet there they stood, with the same smooth skin and steady steps as girls in their prime. William listened, but he also studied. He kept a small journal, noting the days he saw them, the way they moved, the hours they walked. He was a man of reason, believing that every mystery had an answer if only one searched long enough. But the more he watched, the less certain he became, because it was not just their youth that troubled him, it was the silence. Whenever the sisters passed, no birds sang, no dogs barked. The air itself seemed to hold its breath until they were gone. And though they never spoke to one another, they moved with a perfect understanding, as if words were unnecessary. Their eyes, dark, endless eyes, always seemed fixed somewhere far beyond the ridge, on something no one else could see. The valley grew restless as 1838 dragged into spring. Crops failed, sickness spread, and storms rolled down from the mountains with a fury that split barns and scattered cattle. The old folks began to whisper louder that the sisters had brought the curse, that their unchanging faces were not a blessing but a warning. Some wanted to drive them from the ridge, but others were too afraid to try. No man wanted to invite the wrath of something not bound by the same laws as the rest of God's creation. William Harlan found himself caught between reason and fear. His curiosity burned hotter with every passing day, and yet a cold dread filled his chest whenever he looked toward the ridge. He began to dream of them dreams where the sisters stood in his doorway, their pale faces lit by the moon, their eyes fixed on him with neither hate nor kindness, only endless watching. He would wake drenched in sweat, certain that their presence had seeped into his very bones. One evening, he made a choice that would forever bind his name to theirs. With lantern in hand, William climbed the ridge. The grass was tall and dry, scratching at his boots as he pushed upward. The house loomed against the darkening sky, its windows glowing faintly with a light that did not flicker like flame, but pulsed steady as a heartbeat. He paused at the gate, his breath ragged, his courage trembling, but something inside him urged forward. He knocked on the door. For a long moment there was no sound. Then, slowly, it opened, and there they were. The seven sisters stood together in the narrow hallway, their faces pale and calm, their eyes fixed on him as if they had been waiting. They did not speak. They did not move. They only stared, and in that stare, William felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon him. He had wanted answers, but in that instant, he understood something far more terrifying. There were questions in this world that should never be asked. Hand shook as he lifted the lantern higher, its light casting long shadows across their faces. Not one of them bore the lines of age. Not one of them breathed faster or slower than the others. They were not seven separate women, he realized, but one unbroken presence divided into seven bodies. William stumbled back. The door closed without a sound, and the ridge grew darker still. William Harlan did not sleep that night. He lay awake in his small rented room, the lantern burned down to nothing, the window wide to the night air. But even as the crickets sang outside and the breeze lifted the curtains, he felt no comfort. The image of the seven sisters lingered in his mind, etched deeper than any dream or memory could carve. They had stood there, silent and unmoving, as though carved from the very marrow of the earth. He had gone seeking answers, but all he carried back was dread, The valley did not know what William had done. He told no one of his visit to the ridge, though the pallor of his face and the quiet in his voice told others something weighed on him. He carried on with his teaching, but he found his attention slipping. His pupils, boys and girls who came barefoot and eager to learn their letters, noticed their teacher staring off toward the hills, his chalk still in hand, his mind somewhere else entirely. Weeks passed, and the air of the valley grew heavier. The sickness that had spread through families in the winter clung on into spring. A strange fever laid low both young and old, leaving behind graves marked too soon. The crops, already weak from poor weather, shriveled under sudden dry winds that cracked the earth. And still, the sisters walked the ridge unchanged, untouched, as though they moved in a different season entirely. Old men at the tavern began to mutter that the land itself was turning against them. "It ain't natural," one would say, slamming his cup on the table. "You mark my words, ain't no good come from women who never age." Others would hush him, afraid the sisters might hear even from across the valley. Fear wrapped itself around the people, tighter each day, until the ridge was no longer just a hill with a house. It was a shadow that lay across every home and heart. William tried to tell himself that what he had seen was no different from any other strange tale the world carried. Had he not read of men in Europe who claimed to live 100 years without a wrinkle, of holy relics said to heal the sick and keep youth in the bones? But when he closed his eyes, he saw the sisters again, 7 faces, pale as moonlight, staring without blinking. He could not explain it. And worse, he could not forget it. Then came the night of the storm. It was late summer when the heavens split open and poured their fury onto Tennessee. The wind tore through the valley, bending trees nearly to the ground. Lightning flashed so fierce it seemed the sky itself was breaking apart, and thunder rolled across the hills like cannon fire. Families huddled in their cabins, praying aloud as shingles tore free and the river swelled. William, restless and unable to sleep, stood at his window and looked toward the ridge. The sisters' house stood black against the lightning-lit sky. Yet even through the chaos of the storm, he swore he saw light in their windows, not the flickering of lanterns or fire, but a steady, unshaken glow, as if the storm itself could not touch them. The next morning, the valley awoke to ruin. Fences were broken, fields drowned, and livestock carried off in the floods. But the ridge house stood whole, its roof unbroken, its walls untouched. Not even a shutter hung loose. To the people, it was no longer a mystery, but a sign clear and terrible, that the sisters were bound by powers greater than nature itself. Rumors turned to fear, and fear turned to anger. A group of men, farmers and woodsmen hardened by toil, gathered at the tavern one night. They spoke low at first, their eyes darting toward the door, but as the whiskey burned in their throats, their voices grew louder. "We've suffered enough," one said. "While they walk the ridge, our children die and our land rots. I say we drive them out." Others muttered agreement, though some shifted uneasily, knowing deep in their bones that to raise a hand against such women might invite worse than storms or sickness. William sat in the corner, listening. His chest tightened with every word. He wanted to speak, to tell them what he had seen, the terror that had gripped him when he stood face to face with the 7. But his tongue was heavy, and his courage was small. Still, when the men made their plan to march to the ridge, William knew he could not stay away. If they were to confront the sisters, he had to see what would come of it. It was a moonless night when they went. 10 men in all, carrying lanterns, axes, and shotguns, their faces pale but set with grim resolve. William followed at the back, his lantern swinging with each step, his heart pounding louder than his boots on the dirt road. The air grew colder as they climbed, though it was high summer and the valley below lay thick with heat. The crickets fell silent, and the owls ceased their calls. The only sound was the crunch of their feet and the rustle of the grass. The house rose before them, tall and dark, its windows once again faintly glowing with that unnatural light. One of the men, a stout farmer named Collins, lifted his gun and shouted toward the door. "Come out, you devils! This valley's had enough of your curse." The door opened without a sound, and there they were. The 7 sisters stepped into the night, their dresses untouched by mud, their hair falling loose around their shoulders. They moved together, slow and deliberate, as though each step was guided by something beyond the earth. Their faces shone pale in the lantern light, and their eyes held no fear, no anger, only a deep, endless knowing that made William's knees weaken. Collins raised his gun higher, but his hands trembled. The sisters did not flinch. They stood in a perfect line, their gazes fixed on the men before them, silent as the grave. One of the woodsmen muttered a prayer under his breath. Another turned and fled into the darkness. Then, for the first time in living memory, one of the sisters spoke. Her voice was soft, low, and steady, carrying through the night as though the air itself bent to her words. "Go home," she said. "Your lives are not ours to share. Go home and speak no more of us." The men froze. No one dared move. Even Collins lowered his gun, his breath ragged in his chest. The sisters did not speak again. They only stood, their faces unreadable, their presence heavy as stone. One by one, the men turned and walked back down the ridge, their lanterns swaying in the dark. William lingered at the edge of the clearing, his heart torn between terror and wonder. He wanted to ask, to beg for answers, to know why they never aged, why they walked in silence, why storms broke around them but left them whole. But when he opened his mouth, no sound came. The sisters turned their eyes upon him, and in that gaze he felt the weight of centuries. His voice died in his throat. He turned and followed the others. From that night on, no man in the valley dared set foot upon the ridge again. The sisters remained, their house untouched, their faces unchanging. The storm still came. The sickness still swept through families. But the people no longer spoke openly of the women on the ridge. They carried their fear in silence, passing it from parent to child like an inheritance too heavy to lay down. And William Harlan? He wrote in his journal still, but his words grew darker. His handwriting shook, his sentences trailed off. He dreamed of the sisters nightly, their voices calling in a tongue he could not understand, their faces bending closer until he woke in terror. He grew thin, pale, haunted. Those who saw him said he looked less like a teacher and more like a man slowly being claimed by something beyond this world. He could not stop watching the ridge dot each evening. As the sun sank and the mist rose, William would stand at his window, waiting for the line of 7 figures to appear. And when they did, his heart would ache with a longing he could not name, part fear, part awe, part something else entirely. He did not know if it was madness or fate, but he knew this. He was no longer a man of reason. The sisters had taken that from him, and in its place they had left a mystery that burned deeper than any hunger or thirst, and soon that mystery would drive him to the edge of ruin. William Harlan began to keep his curtains drawn tight at night, but no cloth could bar the pull he felt toward the ridge. It was as though a thread bound him to the sisters, stretching across the valley, tugging at him in his waking hours and his dreams. He tried to drown it in his work, tried to bury it beneath the laughter of children learning their letters, but always the pull returned. When he laid his head down, he heard it like a drumbeat under his skin. When he walked the dirt paths between the farms, he felt eyes on his back, though the ridge stood silent in the distance. The journal on his desk grew thick with pages ink blotched, words fevered, drawings scrawled in the margins. Some nights he wrote of the sisters as angels, eternal and holy, standing outside the reach of time. Other nights he cursed them as demons, thieves of peace, devourers of men's souls. His entries shifted like the wind, one day praising their beauty, the next begging God to banish them. But through every page ran the same desperate truth. William was consumed. The valley, too, was not free from their shadow. Though the men had sworn never to return to the ridge, their wives and children carried the fear in their whispers. Mothers warned their little ones not to wander too close to the woods at dusk, lest the sisters find them. Old women claimed they had seen one of the sisters standing at the edge of their fields at twilight, watching silently until the last light of day slipped away. Dogs barked at nothing in the night, then fell suddenly silent, as though a presence had hushed them. And still the sisters walked, always together, always in silence, 7 figures moving as one. They did not age. They did not falter. They simply were unchanged, eternal, like the stones of the ridge itself. One autumn evening, William's hunger for answers broke him at last. He had been sitting at his desk, staring at the latest entry in his journal, when he realized he had filled the page without memory of writing. The words stared back at him, sharp and black, written in a hand that seemed his, yet not his. They read, "If you would know the truth, go to them alone. Ask not as a man, but as one already theirs." The candle guttered. William dropped the pen. His breath rattled in his chest. But even as fear clawed at him, the pull toward the ridge grew stronger. He could not resist it, so he went. The moon was full, laying silver light across the valley. William carried no lantern this time, only his trembling hands and his breaking mind. The ridge rose before him like a dark wave, the sister's house standing tall against the sky. Its windows glowed again, steady and soft, like eyes watching him approach. When he reached the door, it opened before he could lift a hand. And there they were 7 sisters, waiting in silence. Their faces were as unchanged as ever, yet in the moonlight they seemed sharper, clearer, as though every line of their being had been carved by something beyond human craft. William's voice cracked when he spoke. "Tell me who you are." The sisters did not answer. He stepped closer, his hands shaking. "Tell me what you are. Why do you not age? Why do you haunt this valley?" Still they were silent. But then, the same sister who had spoken to the angry farmers months before lifted her gaze. Her lips parted. Her voice, soft and low, carried again with a weight that pressed against his chest. "We are what you fear." William staggered. His breath came short. "Fear? What fear?" The sister's eyes did not waver. "The fear of time. The fear of change. The fear of death. We are what you beg to escape, yet what you cannot bear to see." Her words echoed in him, louder than thunder, sharper than any blade. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. "Please," he whispered, "I must know. How can you stand outside of time? How can you never wither, never fall?" The sisters moved as one, stepping forward into the moonlight. Their faces glowed pale, their eyes black and bottomless. The air grew heavy, pressing down on William until he could not breathe. "Would you bear the truth?" The sister asked. "Would you carry it, as we do, forever?" His heart pounded. His mind screamed at him to flee. But his voice, broken and desperate, said only, "Yes." The sisters leaned closer. Their shadows fell across him, long and cold. He felt their presence seep into his bones, into the very blood in his veins. And in that moment, William saw. He saw the passage of years as a river, wide and endless, carrying all men toward the sea of death. But the sisters stood apart, unmoved, like stones set in the current. He saw centuries pass and a blink empires rise and fall, families born and buried, and still the sisters remained. He saw their faces unchanged as the world aged around them, and he felt the weight of eternity pressing down until his soul nearly broke. When the vision faded, William collapsed on the dirt, gasping for breath. The sisters stood above him, silent once more. "You see now," the voice whispered. "You see what it means to defy time." William's tears soaked the ground. His body trembled with exhaustion, his mind with terror. He had begged for answers, and now he carried a truth too heavy for mortal flesh. The sisters turned and vanished into the house. The door shut. The light faded. William lay there until dawn, when the sun's first rays warmed his face and the valley stirred awake. When at last he rose, his hair had turned white. His skin bore lines it had not carried the day before. In one night he had aged decades. The valley barely recognized him when he returned. Children stared. Women crossed themselves. Men whispered behind their hands. He walked slowly, his back bent, his eyes hollow. The sisters had not aged in all the years men remembered, but William Harlan had aged a lifetime in a single night. His journal, when found days later, was filled with frantic writing. He had scrawled the same words over and over until the ink tore the paper. They do not age because they do not live as we do. They do not die because they do not belong to time. They are neither blessed nor cursed. They simply are. And no man should seek what they carry, for it is heavier than death itself. After that, William disappeared. Some said he fled the valley, broken in mind and spirit, never to be seen again. Others whispered that he returned to the ridge, that the sisters took him into their house, and he never came out. Whatever the truth, his name became another part of the story, another warning passed down through the generations. And the sisters? They remained year after year, decade after decade. Their house still stood on the ridge. Their figures still walked the hills at dusk. Fathers who had once been boys grew old and died. Their sons took their place. And still the seven sisters appeared, unchanged, unbroken, eternal. The valley learned to live with them, but never at ease. Every sickness, every failed crop, every storm was laid at their feet. Every whisper of death carried their names. Yet no one dared climb the ridge again. The memory of William Harlan, aged in a single night, was warning enough. And so the legend deepened. The sisters became more than women. They became symbols, shadows stitched into the very fabric of Tennessee. To some, they were a haunting reminder that eternity is no gift but a prison. To others, they were simply fear made flesh, a living secret that no man should ever try to uncover. But the truth lay only with the sisters themselves, and they spoke it to no one. And so they remained, as eternal as the ridge itself, defying time, defying death, and leaving behind a question that gnawed at every heart that dared to wonder. By the time the 1840s rolled across Tennessee, the valley had changed, but the sisters had not. Families moved in, families moved away, cabins were razed and burned, fields were plowed and abandoned. But the ridge remained the same, its weathered house standing like a sentinel above the land. And whenever dusk came, the seven figures could still be seen walking slowly, evenly, their shadows stretching long against the fading light. The valley folk no longer spoke their names aloud. To speak of them was to invite their notice, and no one wanted that. Instead, they were called only the sisters, or sometimes just them on the ridge. Children asked questions, as children always do, but their mothers hushed them quickly, pressing small hands against tiny lips. "Don't ask," they would whisper. "Don't look. Keep your eyes down." The fear of the sisters had turned into something deeper habit, tradition, silence passed down like an heirloom. Yet stories never die, no matter how tight the lips that carry them. And as time passed, the mystery of the seven sisters spread beyond the valley. Travelers passing through heard whispers in the taverns. Preachers from nearby counties spoke of the danger of pride, pointing to the sisters as proof of what happens when man or woman seeks to defy God's order. Writers carried the tale into towns and cities, reshaping it with every retelling, sometimes making the sisters saints, sometimes witches, sometimes something older than either. But for the people who lived under the shadow of the ridge, the legend was not a tale. It was a presence. Farmers swore that when they plowed too close to the woods beneath the ridge, they felt eyes on their backs. Hunters claimed deer fled the moment they neared the sisters' land. Children who dared one another to run up the slope often returned pale, shaking, insisting they had seen one of the sisters watching from the tree line. None of them ever dared twice. Every few years, a bold outsider would try to prove the legend false. They would climb the ridge, sometimes with laughter on their lips, sometimes with anger in their hearts. But they never stayed long. They always returned changed, some pale and trembling, others struck silent, and a few never returned at all. The valley would bury their memory quietly, and life would go on. But the story of the sisters only grew heavier as decades passed. The valley itself aged. The Civil War came and went, spilling blood across Tennessee's soil. Young men marched away in gray uniforms, and many never came home. The valley mourned, the land scarred, but through it all, the sisters remained. Union soldiers, it was said, once tried to take shelter in their house during a march, but when morning came, their unit was found scattered and confused, wandering the woods with no memory of the night. Whether truth or rumor, no soldier ever camped on the ridge again. When the war ended, new generations took root. The children of those who once feared the sisters grew into mothers and fathers themselves. The old warnings were passed down, but by then they were less a terror and more a ritual. Don't go to the ridge. Don't speak of the sisters. Don't look too long if you see them. The fear had become a way of life, like knowing when to plant seed or how to prepare for winter. Yet, every so often, someone would glance toward the ridge and wonder. The sisters still walked, 7 figures, never more, never less. Their dresses shifted with the fashions of the times, though none could recall seeing them purchase cloth. Their hair, long and uncut, remained black or gold or chestnut, never graying, never thinning. Their faces were untouched by the years. Fathers died, mothers withered, sons and daughters grew into old age, but the sisters did not change. And always, the story of William Harlan lingered. His journals, saved by the family that once housed him, were passed down as a strange relic. The pages, worn and fragile, still carried his frantic words, his sketches of the sisters, his final warnings. Each new reader shuddered at the thought of a man aged a lifetime in a single night, undone by the truth he had begged to see. Parents showed the journals to their children, not as history, but as a caution. Curiosity could kill faster than sickness, and some mysteries were not meant to be solved. By the late 1800s, when the world beyond the valley had stepped into railroads, factories, and electric light, the sisters remained untouched. They were spoken of in Nashville taverns, in Memphis papers, even in whispered tales along the Mississippi River. Outsiders came searching for them, journalists, scholars, men with cameras and notebooks, but none captured proof. Some said their photographs came back ruined, the sisters' figures blurred or absent altogether. Others claimed their notes vanished overnight, as though the paper itself refused to carry the truth. And yet the valley still saw them. Always 7, always walking. By the turn of the century, the sisters had become less human in the minds of the people and more like part of the land itself. They were not women, but a force, as permanent as the mountains, as endless as the rivers. Some whispered they were guardians, watching over the valley. Others swore they were curses, holding the land in a grip of sorrow. No one knew, and perhaps that was the truest part of the legend. No one ever would. What became of them in the years that Followed is a question with no clear answer. Some say the house still stood well into the 20th century, sagging and gray, but never fallen. Others say it burned one night, the flames seen from miles away, though when farmers reached it at dawn, there was no ash, no smoke, no ruin, only the ridge, quiet as ever, the sisters still walking. Still others claim the house finally rotted away, but the sisters themselves did not vanish. They simply faded deeper into the woods, their figures still glimpsed at dusk, moving as one dot, and today, if you speak with the oldest families of Tennessee, you may still hear whispers. An aunt who swore she saw 7 women standing by the tree line at twilight. A grandfather who claimed he once chased a fox up the ridge and felt eyes on him until his bones ached. A child who dreamed of 7 pale faces watching him, only to wake and find muddy footprints by his window. The legend lives because the fear lives. What the 7 sisters were, no man ever truly knew. Were they cursed, trapped forever outside of time? Were they blessed, gifted a life eternal but lonely? Or were they something older, something beyond man's understanding, a reminder that the world carries secrets meant never to be unraveled? All that is certain is this. In 1838, the people of a Tennessee valley first gave voice to the haunting truth. 7 sisters who defied time. 7 figures who never aged, never faltered, never died. And in their endless presence, they forced every man and woman who looked upon them to face the question that sits heavy in all hearts. What would it mean to live forever? The valley's answer was not joy nor triumph, but fear, because sometimes eternity is not a gift. Sometimes it is a shadow that never lifts, a silence that never breaks, a haunting secret that lingers long after the people who first saw it are gone. And still, when the sun sinks low and the mists rise on the Tennessee hills, some say you can look up to the ridge and see them yet 7 sisters, walking in a line, their faces pale, their eyes endless, their steps steady, defying time, defying death, a mystery eternal as the land itself.